In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, I would like to welcome you to this public lecture that is taking place on the sideline of a research discussion that is taking place these days about ethical concepts in Islamic texts and heritage. And we would like this public lecture to be a model whereby we're going to give some summaries about some research papers that try to shine light on ways of reviving ethics and morals in contemporary Islamic studies. And in particular, we aim to look into ethics from a model of concepts whereby we can revive our ethical vision and our ethical practices. This kind of revival is not separate from the Islamic vision of ethics, but it is only a revival when it comes to the expanded, larger view of ethics in order to deepen our ethical views and concepts and their relationship with the different matters. So we were supposed to have 4 speakers in this seminar, but unfortunately 2 of the speakers were not able to make it and travel and come to attend this public lecture. That is why we're going to have only 2 speakers in this session. Dr. Rashid Boutayeb is going to join us shortly, and we're going to have Dr. Chafika Ouail, who is going to talk about a topic which is very important to her, and it has to do with ethics and tasawwuf or Sufism. And after that, I'm going to talk about another concept. So I'm not going to moderate only this session, but I'm going to intervene as well and add to the discussion taking place. So we'd like now to start with the first intervention with Dr. Shafika. The floor is yours.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah.
All praises due to Allah. May Allah send His peace and blessings to Prophet Muhammad, his household and companions. At the beginning, I have to thank CILE, Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, to hold this meeting, and I thank Dr. Halali for sponsoring this meeting and this presentation. And I'm glad to have you all so that we can all discuss things together. The topic at hand is to deal with the morals of the hearts. Love is an alternative feeling in Sufism. So here we will speak about, do we need a moral alternative, and do we need to establish a moral paradigm, since moral paradigms now have been discussed by Islamic disciplines? I said in the outset we have to try to think about those examples and paradigms and to see were they successful in order to produce a lesson for us to think about the Islamic morals, or should we go and recalibrate some concepts? Here we are speaking about the Islamic moral concepts between those the schools of thought, the existential, which is Sufism, and the one that deals with it from a conceptual point of view. Here we know that the Kalami school of thought and Fiqhi school of thought and the objectives of those schools, and the school of existentialism, which is Sufism or spirituality. The difficulty is that the brain or the mind was a manufacturer of the ethics, and sometimes emotional feelings would attract it. In Sufism, however, the mind is not the one that manufactures it. In the beginning of Islamic Sufism, there were some concepts of morals and ethics based on reason, but they did not uh, exclude the emotional aspect.
حين تناولت القيم الأخلاقية.
And here we are speaking about the school of thought of Kalam, which has dealt with the fundamentals to build their rules. And other experiences came after that in Sufism. It was completely emotional and built everything on the relationship with Allah based on love from the 4th century, and then it developed, and we found that Ibn al-Arabi during the 6th century or al-Ghazali during the 6th century, and after that things became related with linking the morals now with ascension. So now we have more questions even, and among those questions, how did the spiritual experience establish morals as a source and as a concept, and is love good enough to establish morals as suggested by Sufism?
في المنحى الأول
In the first method, here we are speaking about the knowledge. What is the morals understanding in Sufism if we compare it with other understandings such as Kalam and Fiqh or jurisprudence, and then we will discuss the concept and its production and the dichotomy of terminology and its results. In Sufism, we know that jurisprudence or fiqh has established its intellectualism of morals based on utility or benefit, whether mankind realizes it or not. That's because of its transactional nature. So dealing with morals comes from the interest and the reward and the recompense. Thus, we here see that there is an attempt to build a system to resolve the dichotomy or the contention through the ladder of objectives. And here we are speaking about discipline and behaviors. So the approach has dealt with producing general morals that did not build on intellectual concepts. And this is what we find in the sources that have dealt with morals and ethics, which are usually under the banner of fiqh or jurisprudence. And in Kalam, science of Kalam or speech, here we see the issue of good and bad, beautiful and ugly, and their criterion, and it's gauging, is it divine that is determined by a text or human determined by reason? And thus there was a conflict. Mu'tazilites said the control here is to produce the value, and Shi'ites said it is the text, and there was a difference between them. For Sufism, it tried in a new approach to enable for morals and ethics through putting them in the banner of ascension, and that it is a practical practice. Thus, if the moral approach has dealt with this as knowing the general rules of behaviors and morals that help doing what is good and staying away from evil, that is, it looks for the gauging of good and bad. And if it is practical here, such as fiqh and objectives, it has dealt with the morals, and there is a contention between both. So, can we measure them both with Sufism, which is an exercise to instill the good behavior and taking on the divine morals? In Sufism, we find the concept of divine morals or divine ethics. And through their understanding of this concept, it seems that it is dealing with the good names and attributes of Allah, which are the highest example that a Sufi can take on and embody. So here the concepts are the contention on the difference between the nature of morals and ethics in Kalam and Sufism and the source thereof. For the ontological nature here, Al-Kalam science has dealt with the existential concept, dealing with what is good and what is bad, and those schools of thought of Kalam took up those concepts,
واتخذت الأخلاق ثمة طابعا معاملات
and morals have taken a transactional nature that govern behavior. So the nature could have been social more than religious in this regard, and this was done in the same way.
الأخلاق لا قيمة لها في ذاتها عند فلسفة الإسلام.
So the Islamic philosophy has said morals are for a value that would bring about utility, that brings about happiness. So there is a utility concept here, but at the end of the day, it was built on the determining and vetting the concept of happiness. Sufism tried to give this ethical lesson a different dimension.
أخلاق الواجب الكلامية، لأن في علم الكلام الذي تجاذب القضية هي أن هل واجب عليك أن
Is it a duty upon you to do good behaviors because they were measured against divine morals and ethics, so you have the choice? And in jurisprudence, do you exercise morals and ethics because there is utility and benefit from it, whether it is an act of worship or not? So this is the way I see it.
ما قدم التصوف
Sufism has brought about a new philosophy and idea for the nature of morals and ethics in the context of happiness that is sought. So there is utility, but it is not sought for its own sake, but rather for another kind of happiness, not heaven nor hell for the Sufists, but rather the pleasing of whom they beloved, whom they love. And that is to build the ontological moral value, which is embodied in the perfect human being, which is designed by Ibn al-Arabi, which is there is a perfect paradigm in each individual, and he is to seek to reach it. So it is a reflection of the divine morals embodied in the names and attributes of Allah, while at the same time, or rather if Ilm al-Kalam, science of speech, deals with the divine morals through looking at the human morals, because dealing with justice and mercy for the Ash'arites and Mu'tazilites mostly is about an approach that is human, and it is humane, as if ethics of the divine were looked through the ethics of the individual, as it was named by Sufists, while love in the choice of the Sufists was built on stemming its relationship with what is divine. So if morals are sought to please whom they love, then they are also objectives, because they are an attempt to reach this perfect paradigm embodied in the Prophet, peace be upon him, which is a paradigm that could be achieved and realized. So the perfect morals that you are requested to be on is the paradigm or example that could be realized, and it was possible to do that through the Prophet, peace be upon him. So he is the role model of Islamic ethics. And even though we know that there will not be reaching of a level of the unseen. So between those two concepts, Ilm al-Kalam, especially the school of thought of the Mu'tazilites, the idea of morals or ethics is built on the dichotomy between good and bad, and the criterion in that is rational and by reason. And for the Ash'arites, the source of good and evil, I don't know what's happening, can you hear me clearly? The source of good and evil is the text itself, and the mind or reason uncovers the utility that exists in the text, but it does not establish it. Even if there was an agreement and the reason realized the utility which came in the Sharia text, then this is an agreement that is not by establishment, by way of establishment, according to Mu'tazilite and Ash'arites. Sufism linked the issue of good and bad to the human nature, which is a reflection of divine morals. So it has linked the source to Allah. So the source of ethics is Allah Almighty. Its source, in terms of that it is planted in every human being, and there is an ability to reach this perfection. So you are able and qualified to reach this perfection, and its source because of an ontological objective. If the Prophet, peace be upon him, has reached it, then everybody can reach it. So that shows that Sufism, when they spoke about the reference, they built that on the divine moral example embodied in the Prophet, peace be upon him. The other point is that this issue and this submersion, is it original or is it ability? Meaning, am I built with
في الدنيا هذه. ويعود في النهاية الصوفية ليقروا أن
And Sufis say that this instillment, if it is a gift by Allah or is it as a result where Allah created you prone to accept morals. In both cases, it is a gift by Allah, it's not acquired. And they use the hadith that your provisions were divided among you, just like your ethics and morals were divided among you. For the concept, Sufis are aware of this issue, and Ghazali said that when he brought a long text. I will read some of it. He says, know that people spoke about the good morals and its nature, and they did not tackle its nature but to its fruits, but they did not understand all its fruits, and they did not pay attention to speaking about encompassing all its fruits. So he says that Sufism spoke about the fruits of morals, which is that he should not argue nor be argued with because of his love of Allah. Others said that he should be close to people and yet a stranger between them. This is done by Al-Ghazali to prove that point of practical examples that are descriptive of morals. But Al-Ghazali did not speak about the concept. He spoke about encompassing all the fruits and not the definition, because definition for him includes encompassing all the fruits, and that cannot be limited from a practical point of view or confined, and it cannot be confined in Sufism, which is provisional taste that is changing from moment to another. Otherwise we wouldn't have found those moral ethics changing from Sufi to another, even between a Sufi in certain cases and other cases where sometimes you would call it hal, sometimes you would call it maqam. When I found this gap here, I said, let me then research for the features of emotional concepts in akhlaq, morals, and Sufism. Can we find them? So I have resorted to the linguistic impact, and we have the word khalaqa. Its root is about appreciation, and also appreciation of the verb before it happens. And the second one is like when you say, this rock is smooth if you touch it. So the first use is used when somebody is saying the garment has become balia or khaliqa, that is, it has become torn. And if mankind is ontologically born in order to reach the morals and ethics, that means that those ethics are not ethics except when they are good, even though in heritage we find usages of bad morals and bad ethics, because when it's absent, then the ontological understanding is absent. So that's why Sufists called bad morals as pollutants and a disease. So it has turned the good deed and the good moral into a bad one. So you should struggle to remove this clay off this good nature of morals, and this is their view of it. And the word khalaqa is incongruent with the perfect human being from this gateway. That is, a perfect human being is entitled by his nature to be perfect, to realize happiness. That is why Ibn al-Arabi called Sufism, he said, the slave should be following the divine morals, and this is Sufism, to emulate the morals that are divine. And the second one is the what has been said about the morals of a good person as if it's the smell of a mosque when it is spreading. So this is how people know your morals, and this is according to al-Balaghiyin. So they justified that with the issue of texture, and it's not that actually, because morals is about dealing with the other, which we embody from the ontological meaning of the term. And it's a reflection of the Sufi relationship with Allah, as if he became an embodiment of the divine morals in his dealing not only with Allah but with anything that is other than himself. And thus the order emanates from him as the order emanates from mosque. So this is one of the gateways of the Arab roots, or as I see. And Ibn Faris, anyway, has made some mistakes in this regard. And the second point here is love. Oh, 2 minutes? Okay. Love as a moral paradigm in Sufism. This is built on the fact that I love Allah and I want to embody the moral traditions or moral that are divine, which reflect the names and attributes of Allah, but those that are purely divine, such as Rububiyyah, then I embody them where I will be a slave of the one who is worshipped. Others, such as mercy and ihsan, then I can inculcate those morals in myself as a source of inspiration. So the introduction is that mahabba in Islam, love in Islam, contrary to what it is in Christianity, it is not the main value that morals are built on.
كل التراث الصوفي يردها بقوة وبشدة.
This is actually not what the Sufists agree upon, contrary to what this philosopher has said. Sufists rather try to ascend with morals so that it will become a creed and faith and not a mere behavior that is good decided by Sharia. And I have proven that with the theory of Nathari, with using terminology that he has moved all those concepts to what is in the heart, with proving that through reasonable evidence. Sufists have surrendered to that and submitted to it. And with this we conclude. I'll just add half a minute. Why do we speak about this issue? Isn't it not enough to deal with the school of reason? So here I'm trying to say that the alternatives in Sufism were closest in their intimacy with the science of ethics and morals, moving from reason to the heart, from the mind to the heart. I put a big list of impediments that could exist in this pathway, and I don't claim that I have the answers to them, but I claim that I'm still thinking about them. Thank you all so much.
شكرا دكتورة على هذه
Thank you very much for this valuable intervention. It seems that we're not going to be lucky enough with Dr. Rashid, but I think we're going to invite Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib to come to the podium to deliver his intervention. But before that, I would like to intervene and talk about something that is going to pave the way for what Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib wants to talk about. I invited him before the seminar to attend and become one of the panelists, but he apologized. But now I think he has to do it. And I would like to talk about a Quranic model of concepts, which is the concept of taqwa. So from this concept, we can realize how such study can be an added value when it comes to our knowledge and our study of ethics or morals. So when we talk about a taqwa, what comes to mind is a person who prays, who is full of piety, and it is a person that tries to carry out good acts and try not to carry out bad acts. So these persons are righteous persons, and so when we look into the use of the term taqwa in the Quran, so the first surah in the Quran starts with the term taqwa. God ordered, called for piety or taqwa. So there were no legislations, there were no commands, so in the way that we have today. And the last surah in the Quran, it also includes a taqwa or piety. So it includes this concept. So the Quran from the beginning till end, from the first revelation till the end of it, it includes this concept of taqwa, piety. So now we have to pose this question, how has it been presented? So taqwa was known to the Arabs at the time when the Quran was revealed, because this means that the Quran was a message that is directed to people who know the essence of such a message. So when we go into the meanings of such concepts, for us to understand the meaning, for us to understand what taqwa means in the Quran, so we will find qawa, qawiya, the root, which entails protection, preservation, and also to try to get as much concerted power as possible in order to face any difficulty or danger that might arise, whether this is material or non-material. So when you try to immunize yourself, you try to achieve a certain objective. As a result of that, we do find such meanings in the poetry of the pre-Islamic period, Al-Asr al-Jahili. It was used at the time. So, and this explication or explanation maybe applies to some part that would enable us to gain taqwa or piety. But from the different linguistic meanings and from the Quranic verses, it leads to safety, to solace, and so on and so forth. So I would like to talk about this meaning of tranquility, of taqwa, that I would like to summarize through my reading of this concept. So this is a concept that is largely used, whether linguistically or from a derivative kind of perspective. So, ألهمها فجورها وتقواها, which means that taqwa or piety is a psychological kind of perspective. So showed what is good to her and what is bad. So we do understand what this meaning of piety or taqwa. This is the first part. The second part is that we find that taqwa or piety is one of the commonalities between the different religions. So it is a common denominator, religious common denominator between all monotheistic religions. So it is part of the message, it is humane. So there is a kind of a global dimension, a kind of a cosmic dimension, and it is also a kind of garment. So the garment of taqwa as opposed to garments that we do wear physically. So it is a kind of a cloak. It gives you tranquility, it gives you solace, it gives you protection. And based on the examples that I have given you, we do find that taqwa is a psychological kind of position and it lies in the heart. And as far as the prophetic tradition is concerned, there was reference to the heart where it lies. So it is an internal kind of feeling. It gives you reassurance vis-a-vis the future. So a pious person is hopeful to get a good future, and those who are pious can have an outlet, can have a possibility to have a good future and a good hereafter. And the third component, it is understood, it is appreciated by human beings, and based on that, we can say that the concept of taqwa or piety refers us to something which is similar to our conscious, moral conscious, so that we can resort to in our affairs, in our activities, for us to be able to know what is good and bad. It is a way to weigh up options and see what is good and bad. And this enables us to understand what is inside us as being good or as being evil. And this is what we call the ethical capacity or the ethical gift that would enable us to judge our acts or activities. And this is not only particular to abstract acts, but also other kinds of acts as well. So we cannot carry out and practice our rituals without taqwa or piety. So all our acts of worship are linked to taqwa, to piety. So there is no value to any act of worship without this component, which is a kind of ethical or moral oversight on our behavior. So this is something that would enable us to get the meaning of the concept of taqwa. And now, the connotation of taqwa. So what is the relationship between this concept and other moral or ethical concepts? How would they enable us to understand taqwa in a much deeper way? Practically speaking, I see that taqwa is a key that would enable us to understand the different levels of taqwa. So we do find that taqwa or piety is on three main levels. So the highest level of piety or taqwa, which is the height of taqwa, that would take taqwa as a means, which is birr or ihsan, which is the peak. So it is called haqq at-taqwa. And many interpreters of the Quran, they said that al-birru is the utmost level that can be reached, and taqwa or piety is a means for us to be able to reach this level of birr, which is an ethical or a moral act that enable us to gather all acts of goodness by being truthful in those acts and therefore reach this peak level. The medium or median level, there are a number of acts of goodness, such as all kinds of good work and deeds when you are loyal to what you have promised, and so on and so forth. And all good deeds are all part and parcel of these levels of taqwa, and that would make you rise to reach the peak level. And the lowest level of taqwa, or the minimum, or what is close to taqwa or piety, and as it was expressed in the Quran, so when you try to be just, when you are patient, and also when you can give pardon to others, when you can pardon others. So this is the lowest level of taqwa, and therefore be able to reach higher levels of taqwa, and the highest of which is birr and ihsan. So we have a kind of a pyramid that gives us the different levels of taqwa. So taqwa is very much used in the Quran because this entails that this is a kind of a central concept that is very much widespread in the Quran, and gives us an idea about the different levels of birr and taqwa. And it is also a way to gauge our behavior and try to look at it within this kind of scale or levels of taqwa. So it is not only one value, it is a scale of values. It is an ethical position whereby we can see a concentration of all these values that would make human beings rise to reach the highest level of ideal taqwa. And based on this description or analysis, we can say that taqwa or piety is the essence. It is also the standard by which human beings can judge or gauge when they are stuck between a number of options, whether it is in a fatwa or in a religious matter or any kind of behavior that stands between him or herself and a decision-making process. So then that person would resort to his conscience, and for him or her to be able to understand what is good and what is bad, and resort back to his or her natural disposition to differentiate between good and evil. And when we try to simplify the concept of taqwa, we simplify it in the sense we talk about fearing God, reaching a level of tranquility, of solace. So persons should be reassured, should be tranquil, and not in a position of fear, because the persons who are pious
فإذا حقل التقوى هو حقل الطمأنينة.
those people who are pious are given glad tidings of good rewards. So this is an act of the heart and not an act of the limbs or an act of the organs. So taqwa is not only the act of practicing rituals, it is much wider than that and much higher than that. And I would like to conclude my intervention to talk about the different prospects of ethics in the development of our ethical or moral studies, whether from a theoretical perspective or practical perspective. I talked about justice, which is the basis of taqwa or piety, but I just referred to these matters, but maybe Dr. Mu'taz is going to talk in more detail about the concept of justice in a kind of an intradisciplinary kind of perspective, and how this can expand our view of the field of morals and ethics.
شكرا جزيلا.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. The concept of justice is one that is contentious, as it is clear from many studies. However, it is controversial even in the Western studies, let alone the Islamic studies. The discrepancy or the dichotomy or the contention is determined, the conflict is determined through putting it in the legal context. But here I'm trying to tackle it from a moral or ethical standard. Allah commands justice, goodness, and giving to the next of kin, and forbids immorality, evil, and oppression. So there is a group of meanings inculcated in the word justice or adl, such as being straight, going on the straight path, and it is also meaning the like or reward or balance between two things, and moderation, and also purification. It is clear through those different meanings and definitions of justice or al-adl. I will be more merciful than Dr. Chafika with the interpreters. Therefore, I will speak slower than her. So those different meanings of the concept of adl or justice in the Arabic dictionary shows the richness, which puts us in a difficulty when we go over interpretation books of the meaning of adl in the verse mentioned before. The difference between the interpreters of the Quran included the difference of ihsan and other concepts, meaning the verse mentions 3 things that one is commanded with and 3 that you should not do. Allah commands justice, goodness, and giving to the next of kin, forbids immorality and lewdness and oppression. We find different meanings of those 6 different terms, and that brings about a problem or a controversy about the meaning of those terms and the mechanism of the exegetes in defining that. Here I will confine myself to the word justice or adl. In adl, I counted 9 sayings by interpreters about defining this. I will try to narrate them and see the difference of the meaning and the reason for that. The first meaning is that justice here means monotheism or tawheed, that there is no God except Allah, or the right of Allah over the slaves. The second interpretation for justice is that ruling between people. The third one is justice between human being and Allah. This is a way of tackling ihsan because they deal with one another. Also, the fourth one is to fulfill the obligatory acts of worship. The fifth one, adl, meaning insaf or justice. The sixth one is mediation in belief and ethics and actions, and not to be excessive, the sixth one. And the seventh is the equality between what you reveal and conceal. And the eighth one is combining the rights, and the ninth one is putting itself where it is suitable to be, and that includes tawheed and others. So those interpretations, I got them from interpretation books over a span of time, not in one era of time only. So when we speak about 9 interpretations of one meaning in one ayah, that means, or this verse was described as it has combined the origins of akhlaq by Al-Razi, for example, and others. They consider this ayah, in addition to another one, as the ayah that has combined the origins of morals and ethics. The other one is, take what is excess of their money and command what is urf or norm, and stay away, turn away from the ignorant ones. These are the two ayahs that are considered the foundations of morals and ethics. How do we explain the difference here? The difference is because interpreters tried to define the meaning and the nature of adl or justice. The concept of adl has no way of explaining it. It is just like ihsan and munkar and baghi. It's whole meanings that you cannot determine its meaning, its nature, because it is an entire meaning, a complete meaning that has infinite limits and boundaries. Each one of the interpreters try to catch an example and interpret al-adl through that. So the problem here is that it seems through the idea of finding a definition for had or hudud to determine the meaning, and hudud is the way that is followed by the jurists in putting boundaries or hudud in the realm of the five judgments or provisions. So some said different translations of the adl. So in my view, here we are dealing with a group of central meanings and not terms. And there is a difference between concept and a term. A concept is gathering a group of meanings, and term is what is known within a certain industry or an art. So when we go outside the realm of this ayah, in Allah ya'muru bil adl wal ihsan, etc., we find the term adl or justice comes in different disciplines, such as adl that is used between the jurists, which is to be just when you give testimony. When we go to hadith science, we find adl or justice as it is an attribute of the one who narrates a hadith, because here we're speaking about evident adala, which is the person being on the right path, and the hidden one, the concealed adala, that even within himself, away from people, he doesn't commit sins. So adala is in the testimony, or sometimes to reconcile and be fair with different wives when you have more than one. And the other one is when what is concealed and what is revealed are all one and the same, almost and equal. And the other one is the foundation for urban life and the behaviors of the rulers and the judging. When we go to philosophy, we find that Muslim philosophers speak about adala in a different view, which is a philosophical one, such as what we find in the thesis of Miskawayh, which was dedicated to the issue of adl, and he linked the concept of adl from a linguistic point of view, and adala, which means the striking a balance in the universe. So here, this is a concept that belongs to different disciplines. In each one of those disciplines, the term is having its own meaning. So here when we deal with justice or adl as a term and as a concept, adl as a term or justice will diverse in its meanings according to the industry that it belongs to, whether it is from the ulum of the hadith or jurisprudence or philosophy or politics. However, adl as a concept, a whole concept, is the one that is referred by the ayah, which refers to meanings that are entire and complete and whole. So how can we get out of this what is logical and what is fiqhi in order to understand this issue? I see that the moral discipline is the one that will help us to overcome the problem of the had, which is logical, and had or hudud, which are fiqhi. Raghib al-Asfahani, for example, tried to produce a concept for the meaning of adl, which is a conclusive one. He spoke about the fields of adl, and adl for Raghib al-Asfahani is a concept wider than the system of rights, which is usually the work of the jurist and the legal expert. So it includes judging, balance, and seeking the truth and doing what is beautiful and good. And it goes, according to Imam Raghib al-Asfahani, such as when you have a dot in a circle, so that shows the centrality of the point, and it shows also the balance in the different sides of the circle. So it includes the relationship between the slave and his lord, and the relationship between these forces within the inner self, according to Plato, which shows three forces: the anger and the desire and the spoken or the uttered one. These are the three forces of the inner self according to Plato. Also, justice includes justice between the person and his former predecessors through praying for them. This is yet a new dimension or meaning for the word adl. And it also includes justice between a person and others that he deals with, meaning giving others their rights and being fair in transactions, and also the relationship in the realm of the judiciary system. So Imam al-Raghib here tried to widen the meaning of adl and its levels between the slave and his lord, and the inner self, and in the relationship between a person and his predecessors, forefathers, and the relationship between man and others, and the relationship between the slave and his lord. So he spoke about 5 or 6 layers of adl or justice, which are more comprehensive of the philosophical justice that is being spoken about, which speaks about the rights, saying that mankind has rights. So there is a focus on justice in the legal realm. But here we speak about 5 or 6 layers of justice, according to the vision of Imam al-Asfahani. For Imam Raghib speaks about the sources of justice or adala. How do we determine what is just? He refers to 2 other layers. The first one is what he defines as the absolute justice, which is antithesis of the qualified justice or confined justice or limited, so restricted. So reason here is the one that determines. For example, being good to the one who is good to you. We don't need a text from religion to determine to us this value to be part of justice in its universal understanding. But the one that is restricted comes in the Sharia, which is dealt with by the jurist. So we have 2 sources. One, which is by reason and one by text. The one by reason is dealt with through legal systems and legislations, but the absolute justice is linked to another higher layer from the legal one, which is to be good to those who are good to you. And those al-mutakallimun spoke about thanking the one who is the giver of blessings. So those who explain Tawheed or monotheism based on justice, they refer to the first duty as you have to thank the one who is the giver to you, and thanking him is part and parcel of being a moral principle. That's why Quran linked or combined between the principle of Tawheed, monotheism, and your Lord decreed that you worship none except Him and to be good to parents. Why? Because the issue of the parents is that they are the cause of your existence, and Tawheedullah is the one who started you, who created you. So one comes through the other, and the reason for your existence, which is the parents, comes through bir. So there is a linkage between Tawheed and being good to parents, and they both have the same origin, which is discussed by the people and scholars of Kalam, which is thanking the one who is given the blessings. So I think they don't want to confine the meaning of Adl to Tawheed, but they referred to the main feature of it, which is the principle of thanking the giver. So justice here in the Islamic thought is multidisciplined, and it's not limited or confined to the legal aspect, whether it is moral or material rights, and it's not also confined to the criminal justice, but rather the rights of the inner self and God or Allah. So how can we summarize Islamic legislations with all its details? We can summarize it by resorting it to the issue of the three rights, which are wider than the legal rights. The division, which is the right of Allah and right of the slave, and the common rights between the slave and Allah. All the details of the Islamic legislations go back to this threesome, and it is much wider than what is called law, meaning here the law being the legislations of the state, or the law in its norms and social customs, understanding, and the social precedents. So in both ways, fiqh is much wider in its understanding than the legal concept, and Allah knows best.
شكرا دكتور معتز.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mu'taz.
فسحة للحوار.
We have some time for dialogue and questions and answers. So whoever wants to pose a question can do so. Microphone, please.
السلام. ممكن تعرفي نفسك أولا؟
بلال صابر. عندي استفسار.
I have a question when it comes to the concept of taqwa or piety. I do not want to be lengthy. With regard to the concept that you talked about, with regard to taqwa, it seems that it is separate from the concept of being commanded to fear one day or the day. So this is different from the concept that you talked about. So are we talking about two concepts, which is the concept of taqwa or the concept of ittiqa, or have I understood you in a wrong way? There is a second question, if you allow me. Is it possible to have perhaps a link between these two concepts? So taqwa or piety as a reflection of faith. So, what is in the heart and has been reflected or manifested in our deeds or acts. So, you said, or the lady said, that morals or ethics are the outcome of or a reflection of higher morals. And you said that taqwa is the link between our conscience and what is manifested in the reality.
صح أو بشيء سيحصل.
Is when you believe that something is right and something is going to happen. So can we link these two parts? Is there a link between the two? Because it seems that the matter is not very clear. So I'm going to get all the questions, and after that we're going to start with our answers to the questions. The same topic, the same observation, talking about taqwa. I would like to thank you for discussing this matter. And you said that the first generation understood the meaning of this word, and the first that defined this term is Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. And it seems that you have not mentioned the definition that was included by Ali ibn Abi Talib, who talked about taqwa is fearing what is new. So fearing the Almighty and working on what is revealed or revelation and conviction, or to accept the little and to be ready for the hereafter. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. First of all, I would like to thank you for the ideas that you have presented. So, Imam Ahmed, my first question is to Dr. Chafika. So, linking between the Salafi school when it comes to behavior and ethics, and the difference between the Sufi school and the Mu'tazilite school, particularly Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah in many books that have been mentioned as the scholar of suluk or behavior. So this emanates from the prophetic hadith that says, I have been sent to perfect morals and ethics. So I would like you to clarify the proximity between the two schools when it comes to this particularity, when it comes to ethics, morals, and behavior, and which one that should be followed and emulated. Dr. Abdulrahman, when you talked about many aspects, perhaps we could have limited it to matters that were not wide enough. So when we talk about taqwa only as fear of God, but Ibn Mas'ud gave us a different definition. And he was more known than Ali, but I think that Ibn Mas'ud mentioned that when you are
أن يشكر فلا يكفر فهذه جمع
when you mention God and you never forget him.
السلام.
and then to thank him enough and not to disobey him. So we kindly ask the speaker to use the microphone, please. Microphone, please. We kindly ask the speaker to use the microphone. You talked about taqwa and piety. Dr. Mu'taz talked about justice. So which one is the central concept of the Quran? And perhaps the answer to this question is not going to be important to me, but I would like to know the methodology or the standard whereby to know the basis or the central thing in the Quran. In my view, I think we have to study the Quran in its entirety and not to be just selective of certain concepts only. Go ahead. I would like to thank the different speakers. I would like to thank the panelists. So I would like to start with a little bit of a clash with Dr. Mu'taz. So you talked about al-adl or justice as a universal kind of concept or a holistic concept. So when we try to prove the holistic nature of justice, we have to give it an ontological kind of dimension. So justice should not only be an ethical or a moral value that has to do with his duties, her duties, and acts of transaction. It should be a basis whereby the whole cosmos is being ruled. So when we go back to justice, we talk about the scale, al-mizan. And whenever we mention the scale, we mention justice in the Quran. So al-kitab wa al-mizan. So as-sama'a rafa'a wa wada'a al-mizan. So justice, when it go to the etymological meaning of the word, is moving from the tangible meaning to the abstract meaning. So there are two sides. One side strikes a balance with the other. So talking about the scale is the best manifestation when we talk about al-adl or justice. So al-adl and al-adl. So can we give it an ontological kind of dimension to make it holistic? And there are some other concepts that have an ontological kind of meaning when we talk about ayat, not only ayat in the written book or text, but also other kind of ayat. Also when we talk about tasbih as one of the concepts, the whole world is worshipping God through tasbih. There is another point in Islamic tradition. So when I talk about taqlid, I mean turath or heritage. You said that justice can be considered a kind of a holistic or a universal value. But you mentioned also and referred to Greek philosophy, and you talked about the universality and the holistic value. Talking about all these values or virtues such as chastity and other kind of values, is this the impact of acculturation, or is it the unity of all our ethics as human beings? And when Ar-Raghib spoke about justice, I think we have to differentiate between different points. Ar-Raghib said that he linked and mixed Islamic ethics with Greek ethics and came up with a kind of an amalgamated and amazing kind of outcome. So when you are just, you have to be good to your predecessors as part of this process. I think this is an idea that can be linked to Aristo. So amongst the duties of a good person, a virtuous person, he should be just to his or her ancestors. So we have to know what is Greek in such kind of analysis and what is Islamic in such kind of analysis. So my name is Mohammed from Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. So my question is to the lady panelists. So Sufis, when they want to reach perfection, so what is the position of gain? You talked about God Almighty, and He created a disposition or the ability to rise, to elate.
إنه كيف نجمع بين هذه بين أشتات العلوم شيئا يستوعبها العوام.
So susceptibility, God creates this susceptibility in us, being prone to rise or to elate. How can we link all these sciences, in your opinion? Microphone, please. We kindly ask the lady to use the microphone. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, I would like to talk about a practical side. I do appreciate the theoretical side, and I do think that this is the problem why the Islamic world was not able to advance. So the revelation, the message that was preserved in the Quran and the prophetic tradition, those morals and ethics have been preserved in that book, which is the Quran and the prophetic tradition. So the Quran includes a large amount of ethics and morals, and these ethics are not only divine ethics or morals that have to do with our relationship with God, our love to God, and also it does not only have to do with the hereafter. No, there are two sides, two wings that we have to strike a balance between, and these represents this world and the hereafter. But the problem is that we tend to put all of them in one basket, which is the basket of the hereafter. That is why we have seen this deterioration. So when we talk about Sufism and these meanings of love, as Jalaluddin Rumi talks about this love to God, that is why we have seen high levels of crimes, this kind of schism between the implementation of these values and implementing them in our reality and what we are talking about. So we have to try to move from the level of theory to the level of practice, because Muslims have to find the values that would enable them to be immune to bad deeds and acts in their life. If a ruler is just from an Islamic perspective, everything is going to be right. So when you believe, when you are pious, you get blessings. And as Ibn Khaldun said, that injustice leads to the destruction of our livelihood. I was hesitant at the beginning, but I would like now to say what I had in mind. I would like to start from the title of this seminar, talking about Allah al-Insan, and I would like to concentrate on the practical side. What you have presented is very deep, very beautiful, but from my own perspective, it is far away from the practical side of things, particularly if we take into account our reality as Islamic world. Our problematic is that we are in a state of deterioration, particularly moral deterioration, that has led to this kind of comprehensive state of deterioration. I really would have wanted to talk about these values and linking them to reality, to Islamic and Arab civilization in the past when it was in its best and flourished times. So what has been presented by the different panelists is setting the basis of Islamic ethics and morals in Islam, but I would have wanted you to link between the theory and the practice and linking it to different civilizations, Islamic and non-Islamic civilizations. In the remaining time available, we're going to answer the questions. I said that what people know about taqwa as a concept is not wrong, but it does not define the essence of taqwa or piety. And as it is known in the different classifications or categorizations, it does not define things in its comprehensive way. It defines it in a kind of a proximity or in proximity with other matters by mentioning examples, and those who have defined taqwa as ta'a, as obedience, and consequently we have no objection on that matter. So that is why we need to try to cover the comprehensive meaning of taqwa. So to try to evade and not fall into the trap of being punished, to be pious enough and therefore not to be falling into bad acts or deeds. So this is a kind of a reassurance, tranquility that people feel because they fear God, because they observe their own acts and deeds, and this would make you reassured. So fear that the Salihs talk about, this is something different. The relationship between love and piety. When we talk about love, the place of love is the heart. And the same thing applies to taqwa or piety. Piety also lies in our hearts. When it comes to birr and taqwa, linking between these two concepts makes me say that al-birr is the utmost objective that can be reached. And when we talk about a scale that includes all these values through inference. So what is the criterion? Each person would claim that this is the criterion, but we do adopt ijtihad. We might be right and we might be wrong. But when we talk about the rules that based on which we do look into this matter, it is these rules that give legitimacy to such understanding, make it scientific, or not scientific. No one can claim that his or her standard or criterion is the best. And also, I do remember that in prayer, we hear persons say, ittaqullah, ittaqullah, because the meaning of taqwa or the understanding of taqwa is a kind of a popular understanding, praying and praying and praying, but he does not understand that this is a comprehensive meaning. That means that it has to be reflected in all aspects of your life, and therefore this should expand our understanding, our practices, and this is not a matter of 1, 2, 3 things that should be done in your life. You have to revisit ways and means around you, and in a way that would enable believers to revisit their practices. Dr. Chafika, can you comment, please, on the questions? I would like to thank you very much for the very, very valuable questions. I was really surprised when you asked this question when the doctor was presenting his paper. I was asking myself, is the conscience that he was talking about, is it the one that was sought when they talked about al-maslaha, or when the Sufis talked about the complete model, which is al-mahabba, or love? And we have to scientifically link it to this point. When we talk about the Salafi school, is it the one that should have precedence when it comes to what we should follow? When we talk about at-tasawwuf or Sufism, it is a means of practice in life. It is not a school of thought. It is a kind of an emotional, affective way. Even Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya had a kind of Sufism, a Salafi Sufism. Yes. So if this road leads you to the Quran, to God, why wouldn't I try to get close to God through taqwa, through birr? Our way, our road is one. Which one has precedence? I can say whatever you find easy for you to follow, because this has to do with the subject, so it is subjective. So what is the criterion whereby we can know the centrality of those values? These are opinions. So the Sufist experience sees love, and maybe some other schools, they find it different. So it is within the scope whereby we study the concept and how we set the centrality and how it links this kind of concept to other concepts. And the point before last, so the model that we are talking about, we are not talking about theoretical matters when we say that Sufis, they are seeking a model, and Prophet Muhammad as the complete, the perfect model in his humanity, in the manifestation of divine morals, with a difference. We're not trying to say that they are one. No, we're talking about the possibility of such person represented in Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So why Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is the beloved of God Almighty? And those who use Sufism, they think that the methodology of Prophet Muhammad is the methodology of Sufism. So ethics, morals, and values are interrelated. It is not love that would push you to be ethical, that as Shafi'i says, so you disobey God while you claim that you love God. So all the other ethics are moving around love. And this is linked to your question. So if in your relationship with God you try to manifest fear, taqwa, piety, all of them are linked to love, which is faith, which is monotheism. Even when you deal with persons, you seek the presence, you remember the presence of God Almighty, and then you reach the level of ihsan when you worship God as if you see Him. Please forgive me, I did not pay attention to your question. One of the researchers said that the Sufis, they were able to adjudicate between al-qada wal-qadar. So when they talked about kasb and gain in relationship to reason, they disagreed. So when they dealt with it from a different perspective, it has been transformed into creed or aqidah. I do apologize, Dr. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Shafiq for the comments. They are very useful indeed. And they are not causing any problematics, as some might understand. I would like to comment on the central value. I think it was commented on, but I do think, or amongst the persons who think that there is no central value, it is a system of values in the Quranic text. And that is why I think we have to do without the sole central value around which other values work, because I think that these values, they work within a network, within a system, and not only as one sole dot in one sole circle. There is another point that I would like to mention. We have to understand that concepts are part of the discourse. We cannot understand the discourse only from understanding the concepts, because they do set the basis of the discourse, but they are not the discourse. We do aim to achieve the discourse, which is much larger than the concepts. These are central steps for us to understand and appreciate the discourse, but they are not enough. So those who are studying concepts, maybe they limit their research in concepts as the discourse, but they are not the discourse. They are necessary for understanding discourse. With regard to the questions that have been posed by Mr. Shafiq, with regard to the holistic concept of justice, for it to be manifested, achieved, we have to look into the deontological level. So when we set, ontological, when we set the relationship between the epistemological and ontological perspective, this is a long problematic between Mu'tazilites and Ash'arites, and that was reflected or expressed in terms of good and ugly. And is this existence, is it objective? But when we talk about justice in particular, I think when we talked about ontology, leads us once again to epistemology. So when we talk about justice, about what is found, it leads us to the founder, the one or the giver. And this is also a central value when it comes to the Mu'tazilites. When Dawood came and wrote the book of Ilahul Adala, the Lord of Justice. So once again, we have come back to the epistemological dimension. So I do think, so this universality or holistic dimension is achievable when we rely on the epistemological dimension, because we cannot separate between the two. So justice for the Greek is a holistic value. There is no problematic when it comes to the consensus between the two meanings. But the most important thing is that we have to look into the whole discourse. We fall into problematics when we try to compare parts of the picture. When we talk about one particularity that exists in what X or Y had said, we have to look into the whole system, look into the discourse and not parts of the discourse. It is different parts together constituting a discourse, and we cannot reduce it to one particularity or a number of particularities. So we have to know what the bases are and what the objectives are. We talked about Raghib al-Asfahani, for instance. I do not agree with those who say that he used Greek philosophy and Islamized this philosophy. No, he establishes his concepts on Islamic concepts. So when he talked about Ahkam al-Sharia and Makarim al-Sharia, so he talked about what we are allowed to use as makarim, as the ethics of God. So this is a central Sufist dimension based on makruma, and that worship is much wider than makruma. And when he talked about makarim al-sharia in his book, so he did that for when it is achieved through his worship, and then he can become the vicegerent of God. So you cannot compare this concept to the Greek concept. It is impossible, and there are so many details that would take a long time to explain. I would like to conclude with one particular point. So my concept of the holistic, which is a number of aspects that find balance or can be organized together. When we talk about justice, how do we implement it on the ground as this holistic kind of concept? So we have moved from the rational concept, which is put in parameters. So now justice from a holistic perspective, it should be implemented by each person depending on the context as much as that person can. So how can we do that? So the scales differs depending on the deed or the multiplicity of deeds and acts. So justice from the part of the president of university is different from justice from the perspective of a student. So it differs depending on your position and so on and so forth. Justice from the part of the president of the republic, for instance, is different from the justice that is going to be manifested by the father or the mother. So justice means that you do your best based on your capabilities, your position, and the context where you live.
Thank you, Dr. Mutaz. Thank you, Dr. Chafika. With this, we come to the conclusion of this public seminar, and as you may notice, the topic is vast and has different points of view, and this is an attempt to simplify the topic at hand and making it understandable, but the difficulty stands because the nature of this issue is specialized somehow. So I would like to thank you all for coming here, and we hope to see you in the future, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.